Hola, my fellow Umbraco enthusiasts. My name is John, and in this video, you'll be getting a whistle-stop tour of all things controllers within Umbraco V9. Yeah, in this video, we're not just going to be talking about normal controllers, we're going to be talking about render controllers, vanilla MVC controllers, the surface controllers for when you want to post forms back. We'll be looking at API controllers. We'll be looking at back-end secure controllers so you can write back-end things and only content editors will be able to view them. Now, if this is of an interest to you, then carry on watching. And if you haven't come across any of my videos before, this is a post in a series on how to be an Umbraco V9 ninja. So what I recommend you do is tap the subscribe button if you haven't already. Be an absolute legend, don't be a numpty, subscribe right now, follow the channel. So assuming you've done that, let's start things off easily by just looking at the normal render MVC controller. All of the code that you'll be seeing in today's video is taken from my Umbraco V9 starter kit. So you can get access to this starter kit free of charge. Simply mosey on over to my GitHub, and it is John D. Jones, no H. It is also linked below, so you can click on that one. From the home page, you can see Umbraco V9 starter kit has been pinned. Simply click on that, clone it to your heart's content, and do whatever makes you happy with it. Okay, so let's have a look at the starter kit in action. Now, the first thing we need to talk about rendering in Umbraco is routing. And routing is the crux of pretty much all of these controllers that we're going to go over. And understanding routing is really important to understand why these different controllers exist. Okay, so let's go back to Routing Basics 101. Now, when we're creating .NET Core or ASP.NET MVC websites, the routing works in a particular way, and it's been baked into the request pipeline. So let's have a look. We have our website URL, and then we'll normally have a segment, and then we'll normally have a second segment. Now, in a normal MVC website, checkout will normally map to a controller. So we'd expect to have something called checkout controller, and then step 1 would map to an action within our controller. And if you've been doing MVC for a while, this is probably fairly intuitive. So let's have a look. In our example, this would be called checkout, and then this one here would be called step 1. Simples. Now, things are a little bit more complex when it comes to CMSs, and that's basically because of the nature of where pages exist. Now, obviously in a CMS, pages are created by content editors within the backend. So a content editor will come in here based on a number of document types that you define. They can come in and build any type of page that they want. So this means that the URL structure isn't going to be a one-on-one mapping of URL structure to controller or action. If you try to do this, you'll be creating thousands and thousands of different controllers, basically one per page. So we wouldn't have a very dynamic CMS. So this is the reason why that in any .NET Core CMS system, the routing works by mapping a page request to the document type it was created with. What will happen is that you'll do a request or lookup on your URL. Umbraco in the back end will try and do a map. If it can find a page within the page tree that maps to that segment in the URL, it will get that data from the database or the front-end cache, and it will then add all that data into the request as a current page object and then pass it back. Now, by the default, Umbraco will simply try and pass all the data back to a view, and it won't allow you to use a controller. Now, if you're a coder, you've been doing .NET for a while, you'll know that following the MVC paradigm is really good. There's a reason why it's existed. There's a reason why hundreds and thousands of websites use it, because we need to use our controllers and our views. So without doing anything, what will happen is you'll get this view. Any requests to the document type called home will just map to this view. And what we want to do is something called a route hijacking. So route hijacking is just a fancy word for creating a controller that works with a document type. And creating these controllers is really simple, even though the name is a bit more complicated. So let's say we create a document type. We've got home. All you need to do is remember the alias, and you can get the alias from any single document type simply in the top here. Now, to create a corresponding route hijacked controller in code, all we need to do is create a controller. This is just a normal class. You need to inherit from a render controller, and then you need to use or prefix the controller name with the document type alias. So we've got here home controller, and this completely maps to this alias here. And that's pretty much all you need to know in order to start creating controllers with normal pages in Umbraco. Super simple. Now, one of the differences in V9 compared to V8 is there's no longer a parameterless constructor as part of render controller. So when you're creating your Umbraco specific controllers, you are going to have to worry about passing in the iLogger, the iComposite View Engine, and the iUmbraco Context Accessor. Just remember to pass it as a base, and that's all. Now, creating the action is easy. There's nothing different compared to normal MVC really. Just override, do an iAction result, and then pass something back into a view. Now, the view is just the same as any MVC site. In your view folder, create a folder called home, or whatever your document type is. Again, it just needs to map up on the alias. Create an index.cshtml. In here, whack in a load of HTML. That is pretty much everything you need to do to start using controllers with Umbraco. Now, just because we're creating document types, sometimes you might want to create a controller for something which doesn't live in Umbraco. Let's say, for example, you're creating a site map, or maybe you're creating an RSS feed. In these instances, you might not want to create a specific document type. You might just want to create them using a normal MVC controller. This is possible, super easy. The one thing you need to keep in mind is the routing. And we'll keep going back to this routing concept over and over. So remember, we have, different routings, and basically what we're saying when we want to create a normal MVC route is actually we want to use this normal routing rule before. So instead of using the CMS rules, we want to use this default one. Now, in Umbraco.9 and .NET Core, the way that we do this is by adding things into the route table. And in .NET Core, adding things into the route table is done slightly differently. So in the .NET Core, we have to go back to our startup.cs, and this is kind of key for any Umbraco v9 site. Now, within here, you'll get two methods, and one is called configure. And the way to add in custom routes within the routing table within v9 is within this use Umbraco. In here, you can find something which is called with endpoints. And then within here, you can simply define your own endpoint building. So all you need to do is do the endpoint route builder and then a map controller route. And then from here, it's just creating any normal routing rule. So first we have the name. Name can be whatever we want. Next, we're going to define the template or the trigger. So this is going to be the thing which causes our controller to load. Next, we're going to define which controller we care about and which action. So controller equals vanilla in this example, and action equals the index. So let's quickly recap. Hopefully it's fairly intuitive for you that when we want to create custom normal MVC routing, we have to create basically a custom default rule in the route table. This is because by default, Umbraco overwrites and changes the normal .NET Core routing rules to use its own one, so it can look up data within the database. So when we're doing normal vanilla MVC controllers, not a problem whatsoever. Nowadays, you just need to go into startup.cs and add a rule like this. So let's quickly look at our controller. There's nothing exciting about this controller. This is the same as any other controller you'd create in any other .NET Core app. So inherit from controller, which is found in Microsoft, ASP.NET core.mvc. Remember, we need to call the first bit the controller name, so vanilla controller, and then we just create our action index. And this completely maps up to controller action. And as you can see by our root here, I've just mapped this vanilla root. So basically what happens is that if I go back to my websites, if I type in vanilla, this should then trigger my rule. And as you can see, I've got a vanilla MVC route view being rendered. And rendering the view, again, exactly the same. In our view folder, create a folder called vanilla, index CSHTML, and then go crazy, add whatever code you want. So 2 controllers down. Next, let's talk about APIs. So when we're building any type of Umbraco website, sometimes instead of actually creating a view, you might want to expose some data over an endpoint. Now, as a shortcut, Umbraco provides something which is called the Umbraco API Controller. And the benefit for you using the Umbraco API Controller is that you won't need to go into Startup and you won't need to create your own custom rules whatsoever. So basically, inheriting from this Umbraco API Controller is going to do some of the default routing for you. Now, there is a slight caveat when we're using the Umbraco API Controller, is that every single API route that you create needs to be prefixed with this Umbraco/API. So as you can see here, we've got Umbraco/API, then we've got a segment which is my API, and this maps to the first part of my controller name, and then we've got the last part, get some data, and this is going to map to my action index. So all this means is that when I go back to my website, typing in my URL, I'm going to get this is data because this is what I'm returning from here. So the key point, again, to stress it, is that creating APIs in Umbraco is super simple. You do not need to do anything different. However, if you want to make your life easy with your routing rules, remember you need to prefix everything with Umbraco API first. Now, the next thing we're going to look at is the surface controller. So whenever we're working with Umbraco, it is very likely you might want to create some type of web form that posts data back to our server. So here we have a beautiful example. So when I click on the send message button, you can see that we've got this hello postback. Now in Umbraco, we have the same issue with all the other controllers. This is the current theme, is because of the way that the routing works, to make life easier, instead of you having to define your own custom rules, you can use the Umbraco surface controller. Now, the one different thing about the surface controller compared to the other 3 that we've looked at are surface controllers are generally components that you find on a page rather than a specific page itself. More specifically, when it comes to surface controllers and Umbraco, things actually have slightly changed since V8, and this one is probably the biggest change. Now, in Umbraco V8, the surface controller would normally be responsible for rendering out the view and then also defining the action to deal with the postback. However, in V9, when we're creating our surface controller, all we need to do is worry about the postback method. Again, surface controller does not come with a parameterless constructor. So this means that when you use surface controller, you're going to have to pass in a bunch of mumbo jumbo. So expect to pass in Umbraco context accessor, the Umbraco database factory, the service, context, app caches, profile logger, and the iPublished URL profiler, and then just whack them all down into the base class. Now, one thing which is important here is that we've got the HTTP post. So remember to get this right. So it doesn't make a difference if it's post or get. However, when you define your form later on, this needs to map. Now, another interesting and new thing compared to the other versions of Umbraco is this validate Umbraco form root string. So when we're creating these postbacks, you don't want any Tom, Dick or Harry to be able to start calling your endpoints. What this validate attribute does, it's kind of like the anti-forgery token in MVC, is it's going to prevent anyone except for your web page posting back to this controller. So when creating Surface controllers, I always recommend you do this. So this basically is all the code we need to handle a form posting back data to Umbraco. It's going to basically hook up all the routing for us. We don't need to do anything else. So the next question is, how do we actually render the form? Now in Umbraco, the way that components are built are slightly different compared to V8. In V8 and MVC ASP.NET, we could have things like partials and we could use things like the render action. So these have gone in .NET Core, and instead we have the view components. So for my example, I've created a view component right here. It's called Contact Us Form View Component, and this is going to be responsible for rendering that form. So this thing here has this view. The view is in the component folder and it's called Contact Us Form. It's got a default CSS/HTML. It's got a load of HTML in here. And basically, this view component is going to be responsible for rendering this HTML. And then the surface controller will be responsible for after we click this button. So it kind of makes sense. Everything's split up, so it's a bit easier. So let's think about rendering the form first. So this is my Contact Us form, and in order to post back a request or a form submission to our Surface controller, we use the begin Umbraco form HTML helper. So as you can see in here, I've got this using, then we're doing HTML begin Umbraco form. We're passing in a type, which is my form controller, and then at the end we're passing in the index that we care about. So let's map this to our code. So remember, we've got my form controller and postback. So our Surface controller is called my form controller, and in it has the postback. So pretty simple. So Umbraco form, passing in the name of the controller as the type, passing in the action method. Then all you need to do is a simple button click, and it's going to post everything back. So if we have a look on the page itself, do a bit of an inspect element, you can see that when we're doing our container in our row, that's that one, there we go. Our form ID has been auto magically set, and then we've got this action. So basically this is all Umbraco behind the hood magic. I haven't had to create this ID. Simply by using the begin Umbraco form and passing in the type, Umbraco is hooking everything in the background for us. So you might be thinking, okay, how do we render this component? Let's have a quick look in the CMS. So for this example, and I covered this in my last video, so have a look, link below. In my website, I basically have an area called settings, and in settings I've defined my footer, so all the data from the footer, and in here I've got a property picker which allows me to add the Contact Us form. In my document tabs, you can see that we have the settings document type. In here we have a single property which is of the Umbraco block list. The Umbraco block list has been allowed to have the Contact Us form as the only available block. So creating blocks, components, elements is exactly the same as creating a normal page. So within this document type section, I've created a folder called compositions. You can create a folder, whatever makes you happy. In here I've created one which is called Contact Us form, and the only different thing between a component and a page is that this is an element is ticked. So hopefully that all makes sense. we're rendering components in Umbraco using the block list editor, and then to create a block or component, you just create a normal document type and make sure that the is an element type is ticked. Now in code, rendering the footer, again, pretty simple. Let's say we've got it on our home page. The home page references a master layout. The master layout uses this await component invoke async. So this is how we render out view components within Umbraco v9 and .NET Core. So this call here is then going to make a further call to my footer view component. And as you can see, we've got footer view component there. Footer view component just simply renders out a view. And in the HTML, I'm using the get block list HTML helper. So this is Umbraco specific. So get block list HTML is the Umbraco helper for rendering out any block list editor properties. This will then call eventually a folder within this components. So we also have the contact us form view component. So let's recap that. So we have our page, which inherits from a layout. In the layout, we're rendering a footer view component. The footer view component is rendering out a Umbraco property of type block list editor. That's done by doing that get block list editor HTML. That's then going to call this contact us form view component. And then this is going to render our view. So going back to our view, you can see that we have our contact us form view. And then here we call our Umbraco surface controller using begin Umbraco form, passing in the type and the action name. Bit long-winded, however, I hope you get the gist. Posting back to a form is super simple. You basically need to define just your own surface controller, use begin form, and then however you want to render this form on your website is up to you. However, I probably recommend that you look at the view component.
Final!
The APIs that we've created so far have all been publicly available, so anyone on the whole of the internet can view our data. Now, this is all fine and dandy, but what happens if you want to create secure data? Maybe we want to create a backend plugin within the Umbraco backend, and we only want our view to be available to people who have been logged in into the CMS. Maybe we want to do some sort of secure API, and in these instances we want to have a locked down experience. So Umbraco provides two further controllers to help us lock things down. Now the first one is the easy one, which is the Umbraco authorized API controller. So the nice thing about the authorized API controller is that it does all the background routing for us. You won't need to do anything yourself. All you need to do is create a new controller, inherit from it, create your default index action or create an action, call it whatever you want. Job is a good one. Now the caveat of how you access your API is that it will need to be prefixed with /Umbraco /backoffice/API. Next, in your segment, as you can see here, we have secure, and secure maps to the controller name. And then finally, we have index, and index maps to this action. So secure and index can be anything you want. However, every single time you create one of these secure APIs, you need to create or prefix it with this. So let's have a look at this in action. Going back to our websites, if I do a little search, you can see I'm getting this secure content, so you can change it however you want. Now, if you want to create a backend view, that is also possible. And this is possible through the Umbraco authorized controller. Now, unfortunately, the Umbraco authorized controller does not do the routing for you automatically. And it's going to be up to you to be able to define some routing rules again. So let's have a look at the code quickly. So inherit from Umbraco authorized controllers, create your action method, call it wherever you want, return some content. Now, there's a few ways of doing this. For this high level overview, we're going to be going back into our startup.cs file. So in our startup.cs, underneath our vanilla root, we can also add in a extra root. So what we're going to do with this root is we need to have Umbraco/backoffice. And this is like key for any authorized API, backend, view, plugin view, whatever you want to create. So anything which is prefixed with Umbraco/backend, you have to be a logged in user in order to be able to access it. So remember, we had our authorized controller. The beginning bit of it was Umbraco backend. This is exactly the same. I don't care about that. Go away. So let's have a look at our startup CS again. What we're doing here is defining a name. I'm defining the trigger. So this is going to be the URL that we're going to access. So this needs to be Umbraco/backoffice. After that, you can then put in whatever you want. So I'm going to call mine plugins backend/index. And the important thing is that I'm doing a rule here which maps to my controller and my action. So this is pretty much all we need to create that secure controller. So now if I go back to our websites, type in Umbraco backend, we should see hello from authorized controller. And looking at our thing, there we go, hello from authorized controller. So let's just prove, I know you believe me, but let's prove it anyway. So if I go to the backend, log out using the big logouts button. If we go to our authorized controller, click refresh, oh no, panic. We've been redirected, so our data is secure. And if we go to our API endpoint, refresh, oh no, we've been redirected. So as you can see, when it comes to Umbraco, you have a plethora of all these different options when you want to render different content within your applications. That covers pretty much every single one of the controllers that you'll want to use whenever you're building a site using Umbraco CMS. So I'm hoping that you learned something new and insightful from my video. This was again kind of a long one, but through feedback, everyone seems to like these more global overviews where I cover everything. So if you like these types of videos, please leave a comment. Again, I do these videos for you guys out there. I don't like just waffling on in front of a camera. So if there's a topic on Umbraco or CMS or Jamstack that you'd like me to cover, please leave a comment below because I will get back round to them. So it's that stage of the video where I have to sell some of my stuff. There will be an Umbraco V9 book coming soon, so keep your eyes peeled for that. If you want to know when that comes, I recommend you subscribe to my newsletter. The link is below. Every Sunday you'll get some information with some news, links, motivational stuff, all about CMS development, web development. So basically, if you want to become a better developer, subscribe to that, free, won't be spammed. If you've enjoyed this video and you found value from it, please tap the subscribe button or smash the thumbs up button. It does really help get my videos shown to more people, so I'd greatly appreciate that. Otherwise, I hope you're having the amazing time wherever you are in the world right now. Hope you're having a great day, got some value from this video, and happy coding.